What if everything we've been taught about starting projects, with all the research and the data, is actually the slow, risky path? What if the real secret to a faster, more impactful strategy is to begin with the end, before you even have a single data point?
Okay, so take a look at this. This slide really paints the picture, doesn't it? On the left, you've got the old way, which I'm sure feels super familiar to a lot of you. It's that mad dash to grab all the data, which leads to weeks of analysis, and then that giant 75-slide data dump where you're just hunting for a story at the very end. The new way just flips that on its head. You start with the story on day one, which then becomes a testable narrative that defines the exact work you need to do. It's a huge shift from being data-driven to being story-defined.
Now, to really get why this new approach is so powerful, we first have to talk about the problem it solves. Let's call it the strategy data trap.
This right here, this is the core of the trap. We feel so productive when we're collecting data, right? We tell our teams to go boil the ocean. But you know what? Without a clear hypothesis, all we're really doing is creating noise. Before you know it, your teams are drowning in spreadsheets and interview transcripts, totally lost, with no clear direction or story to tell.
There's this almost legendary story about this. A team was given this critical growth plan to figure out. They did what they thought was right. They spent 3 solid weeks gathering terabytes of market data. And the result? A 75-slide presentation that was just a collection of disconnected facts. No story, no recommendation, nothing. The project was literally about to be shut down. It was a total failure, not because the team wasn't smart, but because the process itself was broken.
And this quote just brilliantly nails the principle that saves you from that trap. See, the real work of strategy isn't finding data, it's knowing precisely what data is worth finding in the first place. The thinking has to come before the analysis.
So how do we actually do that? Well, it all starts with something called the storyboard first framework.
So what is this thing? A pre-populated storyboard is basically your entire final presentation, but you create it on day one, without any real data. It's a structure of headlines and hand-drawn charts that lay out your best guess, your hypothesis, of the final story. And let's be clear, this is not a presentation template. It's a rigorous thinking tool designed to force your team to think critically about the narrative before a single analysis is even run.
Okay, so let's break down how you actually do this. The magic here is that this entire process happens right at the very beginning of a project. It turns a vague, fuzzy problem into a concrete plan of attack in just a day or two.
Let's walk through this, step by step. First, you define the problem and options. You get crystal clear on the question you're answering. Then, and this is critical, you prioritize and hypothesize. You have to make a choice and form a testable point of view. Now, step 3 is where the rubber meets the road. You design the tests. You literally sketch the blank chart, axes, labels, everything that would prove your point. Then comes the most powerful step, pre-populate. You hand draw what you expect the data to look like, which forces every single hidden assumption out into the open. From there, you write the headlines for each of these imagined charts. Step 6, you arrange the story by sequencing those headlines into a narrative that actually flows. And finally, the most important gate of all, you validate the story.
And that validation step brings us to this crucial question. You read through your data list storyboard, and you ask your team, if all our assumptions are right, and this is the story the data tells, is it actually compelling? Is the recommendation a big deal? If the answer is no, you've just saved your team weeks, maybe months of pointless work. You get to pivot before the real work even begins.
Now, as a leader, knowing the framework is one thing, but actually implementing it with your team is a whole other ballgame. So let's talk about how you can actually put this to work.
Here's your playbook. First off, for the first 48 hours of any new project, you ban all data collection. Seriously, force the thinking to happen first. Second, you enforce the empty slide test. It's simple. If your team can't draw the chart and write the headline for an analysis before they start it, they aren't ready to do the work. And finally, you have to obsess over the headlines. Read them out loud, in order. Do they tell a coherent story all by themselves? If not, the thinking just isn't clear enough yet. And to drive this thinking, here are the kinds of questions you should be asking. If we had all the data in the world right now, today, what's the one story we would tell the CEO? This question just cuts through all the noise. Ask them to describe the single most important slide, and constantly challenge them. Is this conclusion actually impactful enough to justify all the work we're about to put in?
But a quick word of caution here. The storyboard is a set of testable assumptions. It is not a sacred text.
The team has to be ready to throw it all out if the real data says otherwise. Also, watch out for teams who are uncomfortable making assumptions. This framework requires real business judgment. And please, remind everyone, this is a work plan, not the final presentation.
All right, we always like to end with a single, clear action that you can take to put all this into practice immediately.
So here it is. On Monday morning, I want you to walk up to the team that's working on your most important, highest priority project and ask them for the 10-slide data list storyboard. Don't ask for a status update. Don't ask about data collection. Ask for the story. I promise you that single request will tell you everything you need to know about the clarity of their thinking.
So, as we close out, just think about your own portfolio of projects. Which one is the most ambiguous, the most critical? What do you think would happen if you paused the data gathering frenzy and instead de-risked the entire effort by simply demanding to see the story first?